Question 1. The evaluation methodology shows that during a critical incident, a company's primary spokesperson is scheduled for a live television interview. Which of the following preparation strategies best aligns with regulatory requirements and ethical best practices for crisis communication, ensuring accuracy and minimizing reputational damage? Option A. The spokesperson will be advised to provide only general statements about the company's commitment to resolving the issue without addressing any specific details of the incident. Option B. The spokesperson will be briefed on the core facts of the incident and provided with pre-approved key messages and anticipated difficult questions, with a clear directive to stick to these messages and defer any questions outside their scope to a designated media relations officer. Option C. The company will instruct the spokesperson to decline all media interviews until the crisis is fully resolved and all facts are definitively established. Option D. The spokesperson will be instructed to answer all questions truthfully as they come to mind, relying on their general knowledge of the situation to provide immediate responses. The correct answer is B. The spokesperson will be briefed on the core facts of the incident and provided with pre-approved key messages and anticipated difficult questions, with a clear directive to stick to these messages and defer any questions outside their scope to a designated media relations officer. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information dissemination during a crisis with the imperative to maintain accuracy, control the narrative, and adhere to regulatory disclosure obligations. The pressure to respond quickly can lead to premature or incomplete statements, potentially misinforming the public and stakeholders, and creating legal or reputational risks. Careful judgment is required to ensure all communications are factual, consistent, and aligned with the organization's crisis communication plan and legal responsibilities. The correct approach involves a structured preparation process that includes identifying key spokespersons, developing core messages, anticipating difficult questions, and conducting practice interviews. This ensures that spokespersons are well briefed, confident, and able to deliver accurate and consistent information under pressure. Adherence to regulatory frameworks, such as those governing financial disclosures or public safety announcements, is paramount. For instance, in the U.S., the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, has rules regarding material non-public information that must be considered. Similarly, public health crises might involve specific reporting requirements to agencies like the CDC. This proactive and controlled preparation minimizes the risk of misstatements and ensures compliance. An incorrect approach that relies solely on an unprepared spokesperson to wing it is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the ethical obligation to provide accurate information and can lead to inadvertent disclosure of incorrect or misleading statements, violating principles of transparency and potentially breaching regulatory requirements for truthful communication. Another incorrect approach, which is to refuse all media interviews until the situation is fully resolved, is also professionally unsound. While it avoids immediate risk of misstatement, it creates a communication vacuum. This vacuum can be filled by speculation, rumors, and misinformation, damaging the organization's reputation and public trust. It also fails to meet the ethical duty to inform stakeholders and the public about material developments in a timely manner, as often expected by regulatory bodies and the public. A third incorrect approach, which is to provide only vague, noncommittal answers without addressing the core issues, demonstrates a lack of transparency and can be perceived as evasive. This erodes credibility and trust, and while it might avoid specific misstatements, it fails to fulfill the communicative purpose of an interview during a crisis, which is to provide clarity and reassurance. Regulatory bodies often expect clear communication regarding material events. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a risk assessment of potential communication outcomes. This includes evaluating the likelihood and impact of providing inaccurate information versus the risk of a communication vacuum. The process should prioritize accuracy, consistency, and compliance with all applicable regulations and ethical guidelines. It necessitates a pre-approved crisis communication plan that outlines roles, responsibilities, message development, and media engagement protocols. Regular training and simulation exercises are crucial to ensure spokespersons are prepared to navigate challenging media interactions effectively and responsibly. Question 2. Operational review demonstrates that the crisis communication team has identified several potential threats and weaknesses, including a recent increase in social media misinformation campaigns targeting the industry, a known legacy IT system with known security vulnerabilities, and a potential for supply chain disruption due to geopolitical instability. Which of the following approaches best addresses the implementation challenge of translating these findings into actionable crisis communication preparedness? Option A. Prioritize communication planning solely on the social media misinformation, as this is the most visible and immediate threat, and address other identified vulnerabilities only if they materialize into actual incidents. Option B. Develop a comprehensive risk register that categorizes identified threats and vulnerabilities by likelihood and potential impact, and then create tiered communication response plans with pre-approved messaging frameworks for the highest priority risks. Option C. Delegate the responsibility for developing communication strategies for each identified vulnerability to the respective department heads, assuming they have the necessary communication expertise. Option D. Focus immediate efforts on crafting generic crisis communication templates that can be adapted quickly to any situation, as the specific nature of future crises is inherently unpredictable. The correct answer is B. Develop a comprehensive risk register that categorizes identified threats and vulnerabilities by likelihood and potential impact, and then create tiered communication response plans with pre-approved messaging frameworks for the highest priority risks. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the crisis communication team to move beyond a reactive stance to a proactive one, integrating risk assessment and vulnerability analysis into their core operational review. The challenge lies in translating theoretical identification of threats and weaknesses into actionable communication strategies that are both compliant with regulatory frameworks and ethically sound. Careful judgment is required to prioritize identified risks based on their potential impact and likelihood, ensuring that communication resources are allocated effectively and that the organization is prepared to address the most critical vulnerabilities. The correct approach involves systematically documenting identified threats and weaknesses, assigning a risk score based on potential impact and likelihood, and then developing specific communication protocols and pre-approved messaging for each high-priority risk. This aligns with the principles of robust crisis preparedness mandated by regulatory bodies that expect organizations to demonstrate due diligence in anticipating and mitigating potential reputational and operational damage. Ethically, this proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to transparency and stakeholder well-being by preparing to communicate effectively during a crisis, thereby minimizing harm and maintaining trust. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical incidents without considering emerging threats or systemic vulnerabilities fails to meet the forward-looking requirements of effective crisis communication planning. Regulatory frameworks often emphasize the need for ongoing risk assessment and adaptation to evolving threat landscapes. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes only the most visible or sensational threats, neglecting less obvious but potentially devastating weaknesses, demonstrates a failure in comprehensive analysis and could lead to significant regulatory scrutiny and reputational damage if overlooked vulnerabilities are exploited. Furthermore, an approach that delays the development of communication protocols until a crisis is imminent, rather than having them pre-established, directly contravenes best practices and regulatory expectations for timely and effective crisis response, potentially leading to miscommunication, panic, and regulatory noncompliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the organization's operational environment and regulatory obligations. This involves a structured process of threat identification, vulnerability assessment, and impact analysis. The next step is to prioritize these risks, often using a matrix that considers likelihood and severity. For each prioritized risk, specific communication objectives, target audiences, key messages, and communication channels should be defined. This proactive planning should be documented, regularly reviewed, and integrated into the organization's overall crisis management plan, ensuring that the crisis communication team is equipped to respond effectively and compliantly when a crisis occurs. Question 3. The control framework reveals that a critical product defect has been identified, posing a potential safety risk to consumers. Initial internal assessments suggest the issue is widespread, but the full extent and potential harm are still under investigation. The company's legal team advises a cautious approach, recommending minimal public disclosure until all facts are definitively established to avoid potential litigation and reputational damage. However, the communications department believes a more proactive and transparent approach is ethically imperative to protect consumers and maintain public trust. Which approach best navigates this moral dilemma while adhering to ethical and regulatory expectations? Option A. Issue a brief, vague statement acknowledging an internal review of a product issue without specifying the nature or potential risk, to avoid causing undue alarm. Option B. Immediately issue a public statement acknowledging the potential safety risk, detailing the known information, outlining the investigation process, and providing clear guidance to consumers on immediate precautions, while committing to regular updates. Option C. Focus internal efforts on rectifying the defect and only communicate externally once a solution is fully implemented and tested, assuring consumers the product is now safe. Option D. Delay any public statement until the investigation is fully complete and all potential liabilities are assessed, at which point a comprehensive statement will be released. The correct answer is B. Immediately issue a public statement acknowledging the potential safety risk, detailing the known information, outlining the investigation process, and providing clear guidance to consumers on immediate precautions, while committing to regular updates. Explanation. This scenario presents a significant ethical challenge in crisis communication, demanding careful judgment due to the inherent tension between the organization's desire to protect its reputation and the public's right to timely and accurate information. The professional challenge lies in balancing these competing interests while adhering to ethical principles and regulatory requirements. The need for transparency is paramount in building and maintaining trust during a crisis. The correct approach involves immediate, honest, and comprehensive communication about the incident, acknowledging the severity and outlining the steps being taken to address it. This aligns with the ethical principle of transparency and the regulatory expectation of prompt disclosure of material information that could affect stakeholders. Specifically, under UK regulations and CISI guidelines, there is a strong emphasis on acting with integrity and honesty and providing clear, fair, and not misleading information. This approach fosters trust, allows stakeholders to make informed decisions, and ultimately mitigates long-term reputational damage by demonstrating accountability. An incorrect approach that prioritizes downplaying the severity of the incident or withholding critical details is ethically unsound and likely violates regulatory obligations. Such an approach erodes trust, can lead to misinformation, and may result in severe penalties for non-compliance. For instance, deliberately misleading stakeholders or failing to disclose material information promptly could be seen as a breach of the duty of care and integrity expected by regulators like the FCA and professional bodies like CISI. This can lead to reputational damage that is far more difficult to repair than the initial crisis. Another incorrect approach, which involves waiting for all facts to be confirmed before communicating, can also be detrimental. While accuracy is crucial, prolonged silence in a crisis can be interpreted as evasiveness or a lack of control. Ethical crisis communication often requires acknowledging what is known, stating what is being investigated, and committing to providing updates as information becomes available. This demonstrates proactivity and a commitment to transparency, even when complete certainty is not yet achieved. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a rapid assessment of the situation, identification of key stakeholders, and a clear understanding of legal and ethical obligations. A crisis communication plan should be activated, and a designated team should convene to determine the most accurate and transparent message possible, considering the immediate impact and long-term consequences. Prioritizing honesty, empathy, and a commitment to resolution, while adhering to regulatory frameworks, is the cornerstone of effective and ethical crisis communication. Question 4. The performance metrics show a significant increase in negative social media sentiment following a product recall announcement. Which of the following communication strategies best embodies the core principles and objectives of crisis communication in this scenario? Option A. Focus on drafting internal talking points for employees and preparing legal responses to potential lawsuits, while delaying a public statement until all internal and legal aspects are fully resolved. Option B. Prioritize crafting a positive spin on the recall by highlighting the company's commitment to quality and innovation, downplaying the severity of the safety issue and emphasizing the limited scope of the affected products. Option C. Release a brief, generic statement confirming a product recall without elaborating on the specific reasons or the steps being taken, and instruct customer service to direct all inquiries to a pre-recorded message. Option D. Immediately issue a public statement acknowledging the recall, explaining the safety concerns, detailing the corrective actions being taken, and providing clear instructions for customers on how to return affected products, while simultaneously monitoring social media for emerging concerns and responding with factual updates. The correct answer is D. Immediately issue a public statement acknowledging the recall, explaining the safety concerns, detailing the corrective actions being taken, and providing clear instructions for customers on how to return affected products, while simultaneously monitoring social media for emerging concerns and responding with factual updates. Explanation: the performance metrics show a significant increase in negative social media sentiment following a product recall announcement. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires immediate, strategic communication that balances transparency with the need to mitigate reputational damage and maintain customer trust. The rapid dissemination of information in the digital age means that a poorly handled crisis can escalate quickly, impacting stock prices, regulatory scrutiny, and long-term brand loyalty. Careful judgment is required to ensure all communications are accurate, timely, and aligned with the organization's values and legal obligations. The correct approach involves a multifaceted strategy focused on proactive, empathetic, and transparent communication. This includes acknowledging the issue promptly, clearly explaining the reasons for the recall, outlining the steps being taken to rectify the situation, and providing clear instructions for affected customers. This approach aligns with the core principles of crisis communication, which aim to inform, reassure, and demonstrate accountability. Ethically, it upholds the duty of care to customers and stakeholders. From a regulatory perspective, particularly within the framework of consumer protection laws and financial disclosure requirements, if applicable, timely and accurate disclosure is paramount to avoid penalties and maintain market confidence. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on damage control without acknowledging the root cause or customer impact would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to build trust and can be perceived as evasive, potentially leading to further backlash and regulatory investigation for misleading statements or omissions. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes internal stakeholder communication over external public messaging would also be a failure. While internal alignment is crucial, a crisis communication plan's primary objective is to manage external perceptions and provide essential information to those affected. Delaying or neglecting external communication can create a vacuum that misinformation fills, exacerbating the crisis. Finally, an approach that relies on generic, pre-approved statements without tailoring them to the specific details of the crisis and the audience's concerns would be insufficient. This lacks the empathy and specificity required to effectively address a crisis, demonstrating a lack of genuine engagement and potentially alienating stakeholders. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough assessment of the situation, identifying key stakeholders and potential impacts. This is followed by developing clear, concise, and accurate messaging that addresses the core issues and provides actionable guidance. Continuous monitoring of communication channels and stakeholder feedback is essential for adapting the strategy as the crisis evolves. Adherence to ethical principles and regulatory requirements should be integrated into every stage of the communication process. Question 5. Upon reviewing initial reports of a significant operational incident at a manufacturing facility that has resulted in a localized environmental concern, the crisis communication team is tasked with developing the first public statement. The incident has caused disruption to local residents and raised concerns about potential health impacts, though full details are still emerging. Which of the following approaches best adheres to the principles of clear, concise, and empathetic message development in a crisis? Option A. Issue a statement that acknowledges the incident, expresses concern for the well-being of the affected community, and commits to providing accurate updates as verified information becomes available, while outlining immediate steps being taken to assess and mitigate the situation. Option B. Post a generic message on social media stating that the company is aware of an incident and will share more information when it is appropriate to do so, without any expression of empathy or specific details. Option C. Immediately publish a detailed account of the incident, including speculative causes and potential long-term effects, to preempt public inquiry and demonstrate transparency. Option D. Release a brief statement emphasizing that the situation is under control and that there is no cause for alarm, without detailing the nature of the incident or acknowledging the disruption to residents. Correct answer is A. Issue a statement that acknowledges the incident, expresses concern for the well-being of the affected community, and commits to providing accurate updates as verified information becomes available, while outlining immediate steps being taken to assess and mitigate the situation. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to provide accurate, non-misleading, and empathetic communication during a crisis. The pressure to act quickly can lead to rushed messaging that may be incomplete, speculative, or insensitive, potentially exacerbating public fear and distrust, and violating regulatory requirements for clear and truthful disclosure. The correct approach involves crafting a message that acknowledges the situation, expresses empathy for those affected, and commits to providing verified information as it becomes available. This aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate transparency and prohibit misleading statements, as well as ethical guidelines for crisis communication that prioritize accuracy, honesty, and compassion. By focusing on what is known, what is being done, and what the next steps are, without speculating, the organization demonstrates responsibility and builds trust. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on downplaying the severity of the situation, without acknowledging the impact on individuals, fails to meet the empathetic requirement of crisis communication, and can be perceived as dismissive, leading to reputational damage and increased public anger. This approach also risks violating regulations that require fair and balanced communication. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy by releasing unverified information or speculation is highly problematic. This can lead to widespread misinformation, panic, and significant legal repercussions for the organization, as it directly contravenes regulations against false or misleading statements and undermines the credibility of the organization. A further incorrect approach that avoids direct communication or provides vague, noncommittal statements leaves stakeholders feeling uninformed and abandoned. This lack of transparency can breed suspicion and anxiety, and may be interpreted as a failure to meet communication obligations, potentially leading to regulatory scrutiny. The professional decision-making process for similar situations involves a structured approach. First, assess the known facts and the immediate impact. Second, identify key stakeholders and their information needs. Third, consult with legal and compliance teams to ensure adherence to all regulatory requirements. Fourth, draft messages that are clear, concise, empathetic, and truthful, focusing on actionable information and next steps. And finally, establish a clear channel for ongoing updates and feedback. Question 6. The assessment process reveals that an organization's crisis communication preparedness is being evaluated. One approach involves developing a comprehensive crisis communication plan that includes stakeholder mapping, pre-approved messaging, designated spokespersons, and regular simulation exercises. Another approach suggests that during a crisis, the primary focus should be on legal compliance and minimizing liability, with communication being reactive and driven by legal counsel. A third approach proposes that crisis communication should be handled exclusively by the Public Relations Department, relying on their expertise in media relations. A fourth approach advocates for a decentralized communication strategy where individual departments manage their own crisis responses. Which of these approaches best aligns with robust crisis communication planning requirements? Option A, focusing solely on legal compliance and minimizing liability, with communication being reactive and driven by legal counsel. Option B, implementing a decentralized communication strategy where individual departments manage their own crisis responses. Option C, developing a comprehensive crisis communication plan that includes stakeholder mapping, pre-approved messaging, designated spokespersons, and regular simulation exercises. Option D, handling crisis communication exclusively by the Public Relations Department, relying on their expertise in media relations. The correct answer is C, developing a comprehensive crisis communication plan that includes stakeholder mapping, pre-approved messaging, designated spokespersons, and regular simulation exercises. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing immediate operational needs with long-term reputational and legal obligations during a crisis. The pressure to act quickly can lead to overlooking critical planning elements. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the response is not only effective in mitigating immediate harm, but also compliant with regulatory frameworks and ethical standards, thereby safeguarding the organization's future. The correct approach involves a proactive, integrated crisis communication plan that has been developed, tested, and disseminated prior to any incident. This plan should clearly define roles, responsibilities, communication channels, stakeholder identification, and pre-approved messaging templates. Regulatory justification stems from the expectation that organizations will have robust risk management and communication protocols in place. For instance, under UK regulations, the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, expects firms to have adequate systems and controls to manage risks, including reputational risk, which is directly impacted by crisis communication. The Information Commissioner's Office, ICO, also mandates data protection and breach notification procedures, which are integral to crisis communication planning. Ethical justification lies in the duty of care to stakeholders, ensuring transparency, accuracy, and timely information dissemination to maintain trust and minimize panic. An approach that relies solely on ad hoc decision-making during a crisis is incorrect because it fails to meet regulatory expectations for preparedness and can lead to inconsistent, inaccurate, or delayed communications. This can result in regulatory sanctions, loss of consumer confidence, and significant reputational damage. For example, the FCA's principles for businesses require firms to act with integrity and due skill, care, and diligence, which are compromised by a lack of pre-planning. Another incorrect approach is to delegate crisis communication solely to the legal department without involving other key functions like public relations, operations, and senior management. While legal input is crucial for compliance, an exclusive legal focus can lead to overly cautious or jargon-filled communication that alienates stakeholders and fails to address their concerns effectively. This can also violate ethical principles of clear and empathetic communication. Finally, an approach that prioritizes internal communication over external stakeholder engagement during a crisis is also flawed. While keeping employees informed is vital, neglecting external stakeholders such as customers, investors, and the public can exacerbate reputational damage and lead to misinformation spreading unchecked. Regulatory bodies often require timely notification to affected parties, and ethical considerations demand that all relevant stakeholders receive appropriate information. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a continuous cycle of risk assessment, planning, training, and review. Organizations must embed crisis communication planning into their overall risk management framework, ensuring that plans are regularly updated, tested through simulations, and that personnel are adequately trained. When a crisis occurs, decision-makers should refer to the pre-established plan, adapt it to the specific circumstances, and ensure all communications are consistent, accurate, and aligned with both regulatory requirements and ethical principles. Question 7. The performance metrics show that our primary crisis communication channel, a dedicated mobile app, has a significantly lower adoption rate than anticipated, particularly among older demographics and those in lower-income brackets. We are facing an imminent and widespread disruption to essential services. Which communication channel strategy best balances the need for rapid dissemination with the ethical obligation to reach all affected individuals, regardless of their technological access or proficiency? Option A. Focus solely on the mobile app, issuing a public statement urging all citizens to download it immediately for critical updates. Option B. Prioritize internal communication channels to ensure all employees are fully briefed before any external communication is initiated. Option C. Increase investment in social media advertising to boost app downloads and engagement, assuming that increased visibility will eventually reach the target demographics. Option D. Immediately pivot to a multi-channel approach utilizing traditional media, radio, television, public address systems in affected areas, and a dedicated, easily navigable website, alongside targeted SMS alerts for registered users. Correct answer is D. Immediately pivot to a multi-channel approach utilizing traditional media, radio, television, public address systems in affected areas, and a dedicated, easily navigable website, alongside targeted SMS alerts for registered users. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it forces a choice between speed and accuracy in disseminating critical information during a crisis, while also considering the diverse needs and vulnerabilities of the audience. The pressure to act quickly can lead to the selection of channels that are not universally accessible or that might inadvertently exclude certain stakeholders, thereby failing in the fundamental duty of care and potentially exacerbating the crisis. Careful judgment is required to balance the urgency of the situation with the ethical imperative of inclusive and responsible communication. The correct approach involves prioritizing channels that offer broad reach and accessibility, even if they are not the fastest or most technologically advanced. This ensures that the widest possible audience, including those with limited digital access or specific communication needs, receives the information. This aligns with the ethical principles of fairness and equity in crisis communication, aiming to protect all stakeholders. Regulatory frameworks often emphasize the importance of providing timely and accurate information to the public, and this approach best fulfills that obligation by minimizing the risk of exclusion. An incorrect approach that relies solely on social media platforms fails to account for individuals who may not be active users or who may have limited internet access. This can lead to a significant portion of the affected population being uninformed, which is a failure of duty of care and can have severe consequences. It also overlooks the potential for misinformation to spread unchecked on these platforms if official channels are not robust. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes internal communication channels before external dissemination risks delaying vital public information. While internal communication is crucial, the primary ethical and often regulatory obligation during a crisis is to inform the affected public promptly and comprehensively. This delay can lead to panic, confusion, and a loss of trust. A further incorrect approach that focuses only on channels with the highest engagement metrics, such as those with the most likes or shares, is ethically flawed. Engagement metrics do not necessarily correlate with the reach of critical information to all affected parties. This approach prioritizes superficial popularity over the fundamental need for broad and equitable dissemination, potentially leaving vulnerable groups uninformed and unprotected. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all affected stakeholders and their communication needs. This should be followed by an assessment of available communication channels, evaluating them against criteria of reach, accessibility, speed, and reliability. The ethical imperative to inform all stakeholders, especially the most vulnerable, should guide the selection process, ensuring a multi-channel strategy that prioritizes inclusivity and accuracy over speed or superficial engagement. Question 8. Examination of the data shows an unexpected and significant operational disruption at a key facility, with initial reports suggesting potential environmental contamination. What is the most appropriate immediate step for the crisis communication team in implementing the crisis communication plan? Option A. Initiate a full-scale activation of the crisis communication plan, including immediate public statements and stakeholder notifications, based on the potential for environmental contamination. Option B. Rely on informal channels and internal communication to gather more information before deciding on any external communication strategy. Option C. Delay any communication until all facts are definitively established, which may take several hours, to avoid issuing inaccurate information. Option D. Conduct a rapid impact assessment to determine the scope, severity, and potential consequences of the operational disruption and contamination before fully activating the plan. The correct answer is A. Initiate a full-scale activation of the crisis communication plan, including immediate public statements and stakeholder notifications, based on the potential for environmental contamination. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires immediate and decisive action based on incomplete information during a rapidly evolving crisis. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for swift plan activation with the imperative to ensure the response is proportionate, accurate, and legally compliant. Misjudging the severity or nature of the incident can lead to either an underreaction, failing to protect stakeholders, or an overreaction, causing unnecessary panic and reputational damage. Careful judgment is essential to avoid escalating the situation or misallocating critical resources. Correct approach involves a structured impact assessment to determine the scope and severity of the incident before fully activating the crisis communication plan. This ensures that the response is tailored to the specific threat, aligns with regulatory requirements for disclosure and stakeholder notification, and utilizes resources effectively. By first assessing the potential harm to the organization and its stakeholders, including financial, operational, reputational, and legal impacts, the communication team can then trigger the appropriate level of the plan. This aligns with principles of responsible crisis management and regulatory expectations for timely and accurate information dissemination, as often stipulated in frameworks like the UK's Financial Conduct Authority, FCA Handbook, or the Public Relations and Communications Association, PRCA, Professional Code of Conduct, which emphasize truthfulness, accuracy, and proportionality in communications. An incorrect approach would be to immediately activate the most comprehensive crisis communication protocols without a preliminary assessment. This could lead to an unnecessary escalation of communication efforts, potentially causing undue alarm among stakeholders and diverting resources from more critical needs. It might also result in the dissemination of information that is not yet fully verified or relevant to the actual impact, risking reputational damage through perceived overreaction or misinformation. Another incorrect approach would be to delay activation significantly while attempting to gather exhaustive data. This risks violating regulatory obligations for timely disclosure, particularly if the incident has material implications for investors or the public. Such delays can lead to a loss of control over the narrative, allowing speculation and misinformation to spread, and could result in regulatory penalties for failing to communicate promptly and transparently. A further incorrect approach would be to rely solely on anecdotal evidence or initial, unverified reports to trigger the plan. This is ethically unsound and legally risky, as it could lead to a response based on false premises, potentially harming individuals or the organization. Regulatory frameworks generally require a degree of verification before significant public statements are made, especially concerning sensitive matters. The professional decision-making process should involve a rapid, yet systematic, initial assessment of the incident's potential impact. This includes identifying the nature of the event, the stakeholders affected, the potential severity of consequences, and any immediate legal or regulatory reporting obligations. Based on this assessment, the crisis communication team should then determine the appropriate level of plan activation, ensuring that the response is proportionate, timely, and factually grounded, thereby safeguarding both the organization and its stakeholders. Question 9. Assessment of the most appropriate communication strategy for a publicly traded company experiencing a significant data breach, where initial reports suggest a former disgruntled employee may be involved, but this has not been definitively confirmed. The company's stock price is volatile, and media inquiries are intense. Option A. Issue a holding statement acknowledging the data breach, confirming an investigation is underway, and stating that no specific individuals or causes are being identified at this early stage, while emphasizing the company's commitment to data security and cooperating with authorities. Option B. Remain completely silent until the investigation is concluded and all facts are definitively established, to avoid any potential legal repercussions from premature statements. Option C. Issue a statement immediately identifying the former employee as the likely perpetrator, detailing their alleged motives and actions, and assuring stakeholders that the individual will face severe consequences. Option D. Release internal investigation documents and employee performance reviews related to the former employee to the media to demonstrate the company's thoroughness in identifying potential risks. The correct answer is C. Issue a statement immediately identifying the former employee as the likely perpetrator, detailing their alleged motives and actions, and assuring stakeholders that the individual will face severe consequences. Explanation. This scenario presents a significant professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the urgent need for transparency during a crisis and the legal imperative to avoid making statements that could be construed as defamatory or an invasion of privacy. The rapid dissemination of information in a crisis, often with incomplete facts, amplifies the risk of legal missteps. Careful judgment is required to balance stakeholder expectations for information with the organization's legal obligations. The correct approach involves a measured and fact-checked communication strategy that prioritizes accuracy and avoids speculation. This means sticking to confirmed facts, attributing information appropriately, and refraining from naming individuals or making unsubstantiated claims about their actions or motives. This approach aligns with the principles of responsible crisis communication, which emphasize truthfulness and minimizing harm. Legally, it directly addresses the potential for defamation claims by ensuring statements are not false and damaging to an individual's reputation. It also respects privacy by not disclosing personal information without consent or a legitimate public interest, thereby mitigating privacy tort risks. An incorrect approach that immediately names and blames an employee without a thorough, verified investigation is legally perilous. This could constitute defamation if the accusations are false and damage the employee's reputation. It also risks an invasion of privacy claim if personal details are revealed unnecessarily. Furthermore, making definitive statements about fault before all facts are established can lead to premature conclusions that are later proven wrong, undermining credibility and potentially leading to further legal challenges. Another incorrect approach, which is to remain completely silent and provide no information, is also professionally and ethically problematic. While it might seem to avoid legal risks, prolonged silence during a crisis can be interpreted negatively by stakeholders, leading to speculation and potentially damaging the organization's reputation more severely than carefully worded statements. This inaction can also be seen as a failure to meet a duty of care to inform interested parties, and in some regulated industries, may even breach specific disclosure requirements. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multidisciplinary team, including legal counsel, communications experts, and relevant operational leaders. This team should establish clear protocols for information verification and approval before any public statements are made. The focus should always be on communicating what is known, what is being done, and what the next steps are, while carefully avoiding any statements that could be legally actionable. Prioritizing accuracy, verification, and legal review is paramount in navigating the complexities of crisis communication. Question 10. Which approach would be most effective in developing a robust crisis communication plan that adheres to regulatory expectations and best practices for a financial institution? Option A. Establishing a plan that relies on ad hoc communication strategies determined by the senior leadership team at the time of a crisis. Option B. Designing a plan that outlines internal reporting structures and legal review processes, with minimal emphasis on external stakeholder communication until a crisis is imminent. Option C. Developing a plan that prioritizes immediate response protocols and pre-approved messaging templates for common scenarios, with a commitment to regular review and scenario-based testing. Option D. Creating a plan that focuses on identifying potential media contacts and drafting general statements that can be adapted once a crisis unfolds. The correct answer is C. Developing a plan that prioritizes immediate response protocols and pre-approved messaging templates for common scenarios, with a commitment to regular review and scenario-based testing. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because developing a crisis communication plan requires a proactive, structured, and legally compliant approach. The challenge lies in anticipating potential crises, identifying key stakeholders, and establishing clear communication protocols that align with regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. Careful judgment is required to ensure the plan is comprehensive, adaptable, and effectively mitigates reputational and operational damage during a crisis. The correct approach involves a systematic process of risk assessment, stakeholder identification, message development, channel selection, and team designation, all underpinned by a commitment to transparency and accuracy. This aligns with best practices in crisis communication, which emphasize preparedness and a clear, actionable framework. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing financial services or public health, often mandate robust crisis communication plans to ensure timely and accurate information dissemination to protect consumers and maintain market stability. Ethical considerations also demand that organizations communicate truthfully and with empathy during crises. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on reactive measures, such as waiting for a crisis to occur before developing a plan, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the proactive requirements of most regulatory bodies and significantly increases the risk of miscommunication, delayed response, and reputational harm. Another incorrect approach that neglects to identify and segment key stakeholders would lead to ineffective communication, potentially alienating crucial audiences and failing to address their specific concerns, which is a failure in both regulatory compliance and ethical responsibility. Furthermore, an approach that does not incorporate regular testing and updating of the plan is also flawed, as it renders the plan obsolete and ineffective when a crisis actually strikes, violating the principle of preparedness mandated by many professional standards and regulatory guidelines. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a thorough understanding of the organization's specific risks, regulatory landscape, and stakeholder ecosystem. This involves conducting comprehensive risk assessments, engaging relevant internal and external experts, and developing a plan that is both detailed and flexible. Regular review and simulation exercises are crucial to ensure the plan's efficacy and the team's readiness. Question 11. Implementation of a comprehensive proactive communication strategy is crucial for building goodwill and trust before a crisis. Which of the following best exemplifies such a strategy for a publicly traded financial services firm operating under UK regulations and SISI guidelines? Option A. Regularly publishing detailed reports on the firm's financial performance, risk management frameworks, and cybersecurity enhancements, alongside updates on community investment initiatives and employee training programs. Option B. Waiting for regulatory bodies to request information before disclosing any operational challenges or changes to risk mitigation policies. Option C. Issuing press releases only when announcing new financial products or significant market achievements, with minimal disclosure on internal operational risks. Option D. Engaging in social media campaigns that highlight positive customer testimonials without addressing any potential service disruptions or regulatory inquiries. The correct answer is A. Regularly publishing detailed reports on the firm's financial performance, risk management frameworks, and cybersecurity enhancements, alongside updates on community investment initiatives and employee training programs. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a delicate balance between transparency and managing potential market perception. Building goodwill and trust proactively is a cornerstone of effective crisis communication, as it establishes a reservoir of credibility that can be drawn upon during difficult times. The challenge lies in identifying and implementing communication strategies that genuinely foster trust without appearing disingenuous or overly self-serving. Careful judgment is required to ensure that proactive efforts are authentic, consistent, and aligned with the organization's values and regulatory obligations. The correct approach involves consistently sharing relevant, factual, and forward-looking information about the company's operational resilience, risk mitigation strategies, and commitment to stakeholder well-being. This includes regular updates on safety protocols, environmental stewardship, and community engagement initiatives. Such consistent, transparent communication, particularly when there is no immediate crisis, builds a strong foundation of trust. From a regulatory and ethical standpoint, this aligns with principles of good corporate governance and disclosure, fostering an environment where stakeholders are more likely to believe the organization's communications during a crisis. It demonstrates a commitment to open dialogue and accountability, which are critical for maintaining reputation and regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach would be to engage in sporadic, superficial communication that focuses solely on positive news, without addressing potential risks or challenges. This can be perceived as an attempt to spin information and erodes trust when a crisis inevitably arises. Ethically, it fails to meet the obligation of providing a balanced and accurate picture to stakeholders. Another incorrect approach is to only communicate when there is a direct benefit to the company, such as a new product launch, without any reciprocal effort to inform stakeholders about broader operational aspects or challenges. This transactional approach does not build genuine goodwill and can be seen as manipulative. Finally, relying solely on reactive communication, waiting for a crisis to occur before engaging stakeholders, is a fundamental failure in proactive crisis preparedness and fails to leverage the benefits of pre-established trust. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes stakeholder needs and regulatory requirements. This involves conducting regular risk assessments to identify potential crisis scenarios and then developing communication strategies that address these proactively. The focus should always be on building authentic relationships through consistent, transparent, and relevant information sharing, rather than on short-term reputational gains. This proactive stance, grounded in ethical principles and regulatory compliance, is the most effective way to prepare for and navigate crises. Question 12. Risk assessment procedures indicate a significant operational disruption has occurred, potentially impacting product safety and public trust. Which communication strategy best supports organizational survival and reputation by adhering to regulatory frameworks and ethical principles? Option A. Delay public communication until a full internal investigation is complete to avoid premature or inaccurate statements, focusing solely on resolving the operational issue internally. Option B. Issue a statement downplaying the severity of the incident, emphasizing the organization's long-standing commitment to quality, and assuring stakeholders that the situation is under control without providing specific details. Option C. Issue a brief statement indicating an internal review is underway and promise further information once all facts are ascertained, while actively managing media inquiries to control the narrative and minimize negative press. Option D. Immediately issue a comprehensive statement acknowledging the incident, detailing immediate containment and investigation steps, and committing to regular, transparent updates to all stakeholders, while consulting legal counsel on disclosure obligations. The correct answer is D. Immediately issue a comprehensive statement acknowledging the incident, detailing immediate containment and investigation steps, and committing to regular, transparent updates to all stakeholders, while consulting legal counsel on disclosure obligations. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an organization to balance immediate operational needs with long-term reputational and legal obligations during a crisis. The pressure to control information and minimize perceived damage can conflict with the ethical and regulatory imperative for transparency and timely disclosure. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing demands, ensuring that communication strategies not only address the immediate crisis, but also uphold the organization's integrity and comply with relevant regulations, thereby safeguarding its survival and reputation. Correct approach emphasizes proactive, transparent, and consistent communication, acknowledging the crisis, outlining immediate actions, and committing to ongoing updates. This aligns with regulatory frameworks that often mandate disclosure of material events and ethical guidelines that prioritize stakeholder trust. By being open and accountable, the organization demonstrates responsible crisis management, which is crucial for maintaining stakeholder confidence, mitigating reputational damage, and avoiding potential regulatory penalties. This approach fosters resilience and supports long-term organizational survival. An approach that focuses solely on damage control and limiting information risks significant regulatory and ethical failures. Such a strategy can be perceived as deceptive or evasive, eroding trust with stakeholders, including customers, investors, and regulators. This can lead to severe reputational damage that is difficult to repair, potentially impacting market share and investor confidence. Furthermore, withholding or misrepresenting information during a crisis can result in legal repercussions, including fines and sanctions, depending on the specific regulatory environment. For instance, in many jurisdictions, there are specific disclosure requirements for material events that, if not met, can lead to regulatory action. Another incorrect approach involves a delayed or reactive communication strategy. This allows speculation and misinformation to spread, which can be far more damaging than the crisis itself. Regulatory bodies often expect prompt notification of significant events. Delays can be interpreted as negligence or an attempt to conceal information, leading to penalties and further reputational harm. Ethical considerations also dictate that stakeholders have a right to be informed in a timely manner, especially when their safety, financial interests, or trust are at stake. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a pre-established crisis communication plan that outlines roles, responsibilities, and communication protocols. This plan should prioritize transparency, accuracy, and empathy. During a crisis, the team should conduct a rapid assessment of the situation, identify key stakeholders, and determine the most appropriate communication channels and messages. Continuous monitoring of public perception and media coverage is essential to adapt the communication strategy as needed. Crucially, All communication must be vetted against relevant regulatory requirements and ethical principles to ensure compliance and maintain stakeholder trust, thereby protecting the organization's survival and reputation. Question 13. During the evaluation of a significant data breach impacting customer personal information, which stakeholder identification and analysis approach best aligns with regulatory requirements and ethical obligations for crisis communication? Option A. Prioritizing stakeholders based on a comprehensive risk assessment that considers their potential impact from the breach and the organization's legal and ethical duties to inform them. Option B. Identifying and engaging with stakeholders based on their media influence and potential to shape public perception of the incident. Option C. Focusing communication efforts primarily on internal stakeholders like the board of directors and legal counsel to ensure internal alignment before external communication. Option D. Relying on established communication protocols from previous, unrelated incidents without a specific reassessment of current stakeholder needs and regulatory demands. The correct answer is A. Prioritizing stakeholders based on a comprehensive risk assessment that considers their potential impact from the breach and the organization's legal and ethical duties to inform them. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because a crisis communication plan must be adaptable and responsive to evolving risks, particularly when dealing with a sensitive issue like a data breach that impacts multiple stakeholder groups with varying levels of concern and influence. The core difficulty lies in accurately identifying and prioritizing these stakeholders and their specific needs during a high-pressure situation, ensuring that communication is both effective and compliant with regulatory obligations. The correct approach involves a systematic risk assessment that prioritizes stakeholders based on their potential impact on the organization and the severity of the data breach's consequences for them. This approach aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate timely and transparent communication to affected parties and relevant authorities. For instance, under the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR in the UK, organizations have a legal obligation to notify supervisory authorities and, in certain circumstances, data subjects without undue delay. A risk assessment helps determine the scope and urgency of these notifications, ensuring compliance and mitigating further reputational damage. Ethical considerations also dictate that those most affected by the breach should be informed first and with clear, actionable guidance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on internal stakeholders, such as senior management and legal teams, fails to acknowledge the primary recipients of crisis communication during a data breach: the affected individuals and regulatory bodies. This oversight can lead to delayed or inadequate notification of those whose personal data has been compromised, a direct violation of data protection laws and a significant ethical failing. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes stakeholders based on their media profile or public influence, rather than their direct impact from the breach, risks misallocating resources and attention. While media management is crucial, neglecting the direct needs of affected individuals or the reporting requirements to regulators can exacerbate the crisis and lead to legal penalties. This approach prioritizes public relations over fundamental legal and ethical duties. A third incorrect approach that relies on historical communication patterns without a fresh risk assessment is dangerous. Past crises may not reflect the current regulatory landscape, the specific nature of the data compromised, or the current vulnerabilities of the organization. This static approach can lead to outdated communication strategies that are non-compliant and ineffective. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a rapid, multidisciplinary assessment of the crisis. This includes identifying all potentially affected parties, understanding the nature and scope of the breach, and evaluating the legal and regulatory obligations specific to the jurisdiction. A tiered communication strategy, informed by a risk assessment that prioritizes those most impacted and legally mandated to be informed, should then be developed and executed swiftly. Continuous monitoring and adaptation of the communication plan based on new information and stakeholder feedback are also essential. Question 14. Risk assessment procedures indicate a significant data breach has occurred, potentially exposing sensitive customer information. In the immediate aftermath, senior management is pressuring the communications team to issue a statement that emphasizes the company's robust security measures were circumvented by an external, sophisticated attack, thereby shifting primary responsibility away from internal oversight. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements and ethical crisis communication principles? Option A. Issue a statement that acknowledges the breach, outlines the immediate steps being taken to secure systems and investigate the incident, and commits to providing further updates as information becomes available, without prematurely assigning blame. Option B. Issue a statement that minimizes the incident, describing it as a minor technical glitch with no significant impact on customer data. Option C. Issue a statement that definitively blames a specific, unnamed external hacking group, highlighting their advanced capabilities as the sole reason for the breach. Option D. Issue a statement that focuses exclusively on planned future investments in cybersecurity technology, without directly addressing the current breach or its immediate consequences. The correct answer is A. Issue a statement that acknowledges the breach, outlines the immediate steps being taken to secure systems and investigate the incident, and commits to providing further updates as information becomes available, without prematurely assigning blame. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating a delicate balance between protecting the organization's reputation and adhering to regulatory obligations during a crisis. The pressure to deflect blame can be immense, but doing so improperly can lead to severe legal and ethical repercussions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any communication strategy is truthful, transparent, and compliant with relevant regulations. The correct approach involves acknowledging the situation and focusing on the organization's response and remediation efforts, rather than assigning blame externally or internally in a way that could be construed as misleading or evasive. This aligns with the principles of responsible crisis communication, which prioritize transparency and accountability. Specifically, regulatory frameworks often require organizations to provide accurate and timely information to stakeholders and regulators. Shifting blame without factual basis or evidence can be seen as an attempt to mislead, which can trigger investigations and penalties. Ethical guidelines also emphasize honesty and integrity in all communications, especially during times of crisis. An incorrect approach of publicly blaming a specific third-party vendor without a thorough, verified investigation and clear contractual or legal basis can lead to defamation claims and breach of contract disputes. It also signals a lack of internal control and due diligence, potentially damaging future business relationships and inviting regulatory scrutiny for failure to manage third-party risk. Another incorrect approach, that of downplaying the severity of the incident and suggesting it was a minor, isolated event, is problematic because it misrepresents the reality of the situation. This can erode trust with stakeholders, including customers and regulators, and may violate disclosure requirements if the incident has material implications. Regulators expect accurate reporting of significant events, and attempts to minimize their impact can be viewed as deceptive. Finally, an incorrect approach of focusing solely on internal process improvements without acknowledging the external impact or the root cause of the incident can be perceived as an attempt to avoid responsibility. While internal improvements are crucial, a complete crisis communication strategy must address the concerns of all affected parties and demonstrate a commitment to rectifying the situation comprehensively. This can also lead to regulatory noncompliance if the incident falls under specific reporting mandates that require a broader scope of communication. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes factual accuracy, regulatory compliance, and ethical considerations. This involves conducting a rapid but thorough investigation to understand the root cause and impact of the crisis, consulting with legal counsel to ensure compliance with all applicable laws and regulations, and developing communication strategies that are transparent, empathetic, and focused on resolution and prevention. The goal is to rebuild trust, not to evade responsibility through misdirection. Question 15. Performance analysis shows that a prominent financial news outlet has published a detailed report alleging significant accounting irregularities within your company, impacting its reported earnings over the past 3 fiscal years. The allegations are specific and have already caused a noticeable dip in your company's stock price. Stakeholders are demanding immediate clarification. Which of the following is the most appropriate initial communication strategy? Option A. Issue a statement acknowledging the allegations, confirming that the company is launching an immediate and thorough internal investigation, and committing to providing updates as appropriate and legally permissible. Option B. Issue a strong, unequivocal denial of all allegations, stating that the report is baseless and that the company will take legal action against the news outlet for defamation. Option C. Remain silent and instruct all employees not to comment on the matter, allowing the company's legal team to handle any inquiries directly. Option D. Release a statement that focuses on the company's strong financial performance in other areas, attempting to distract from the specific allegations raised in the report. Correct answer is A. Issue a statement acknowledging the allegations, confirming that the company is launching an immediate and thorough internal investigation, and committing to providing updates as appropriate and legally permissible. Explanation. This scenario presents a significant professional challenge due to the potential for reputational damage and legal ramifications stemming from serious allegations. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need to address public concern and stakeholder trust with the imperative to act responsibly and ethically when faced with unverified claims. A hasty or defensive denial can backfire, appearing disingenuous and further eroding credibility. Conversely, an outright admission without thorough investigation could be premature and damaging if the allegations are unfounded. Careful judgment is required to navigate this delicate balance, ensuring that communication is both timely and accurate, and that all actions align with regulatory requirements and ethical standards. The correct approach involves a measured and fact-based response that acknowledges the allegations without confirming or denying them outright until a thorough investigation is complete. This strategy prioritizes transparency and due diligence. It involves stating that the organization takes the allegations seriously, is initiating an immediate and comprehensive internal review, and will provide further information as it becomes available and appropriate. This aligns with regulatory expectations for prompt and accurate disclosure where material information exists, and ethical principles of honesty and fairness. It avoids premature statements that could be misconstrued or later proven false, thereby protecting the organization's reputation and legal standing while respecting the investigative process. An incorrect approach of issuing a flat, unqualified denial without any investigation is professionally unacceptable. This can be seen as evasive and may violate regulatory obligations to disclose material information or to act with integrity. If the allegations are later proven true, such a denial would severely damage credibility and could lead to regulatory penalties for misleading stakeholders. Another incorrect approach is to remain completely silent. While sometimes a strategy, in the face of serious allegations that are in the public domain, prolonged silence can be interpreted as an admission of guilt or a lack of concern, leading to increased speculation and reputational harm. This can also be seen as a failure to communicate effectively with stakeholders, which is a core tenet of crisis communication, and can have regulatory implications if it hinders market integrity or investor confidence. A third incorrect approach is to issue a defensive and accusatory response that attacks the source of the allegations. This can escalate the situation, appear unprofessional, and distract from the substance of the allegation. It can also lead to legal challenges and further damage the organization's reputation by portraying it as unwilling to engage constructively with serious concerns. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a rapid assessment of the allegation's severity and potential impact, followed by the immediate formation of a crisis communication team. This team should include legal counsel, senior management, and communication experts. The priority is to gather facts internally, determine the scope of the investigation needed, and craft a holding statement that acknowledges the situation, commits to an investigation, and promises further updates. This process ensures that all communication is legally sound, ethically responsible, and strategically aligned with the organization's long-term interests. Question 16. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a comprehensive review and update of the crisis communication plan every 3 years, supplemented by annual desktop exercises and immediate updates following any significant organizational change or emerging threat, offers the most effective balance between preparedness and resource efficiency. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles of maintaining a compliant and effective crisis communication plan under the Crisis Communication Certification Framework? Option A. Implement a continuous ad hoc process of minor adjustments to the plan as new information or perceived needs arise, without a scheduled overarching review. Option B. Conduct a full, in-depth review and revision of the entire crisis communication plan, only when a significant crisis has occurred or when mandated by a major regulatory change. Option C. Establish a systematic schedule for comprehensive plan reviews and updates, incorporating annual desktop exercises and immediate revisions triggered by significant organizational changes or emerging threats. Option D. Delegate all plan review and update responsibilities exclusively to an external crisis communication consulting firm, with minimal internal oversight. The correct answer is B. Conduct a full, in-depth review and revision of the entire crisis communication plan only when a significant crisis has occurred or when mandated by a major regulatory change. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing proactive risk management with resource allocation, all while adhering to the stringent requirements of the Crisis Communication Certification's regulatory framework. The core challenge lies in determining the optimal frequency and scope of plan review and updates to ensure compliance and effectiveness without incurring unnecessary costs. Careful judgment is required to avoid both complacency and overinvestment. The correct approach involves a systematic, risk-based review and update process. This aligns with the overarching principle of maintaining an effective and compliant crisis communication plan, as mandated by the certification's guidelines. Regular but not necessarily exhaustive reviews ensure that the plan remains relevant to current threats, organizational changes, and evolving best practices. This proactive stance minimizes the risk of being unprepared during a crisis, which could lead to regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruption. The ethical imperative is to safeguard stakeholders and the organization through diligent preparation. An approach that prioritizes only infrequent, major overhauls fails to address the dynamic nature of risks and organizational structures. This can lead to a plan that is outdated and ineffective when a crisis strikes, violating the spirit of the certification's requirement for a robust and current plan. It also represents a failure to proactively manage risk, potentially exposing the organization to greater harm. An approach that advocates for continuous, minor adjustments without a structured review process can lead to a fragmented and inconsistent plan. While seemingly proactive, this can result in a lack of clear direction and potential contradictions within the plan, undermining its overall effectiveness. It may also be inefficient, consuming resources without a clear strategic benefit. An approach that solely relies on external consultants for all reviews, without internal engagement, risks creating a plan that is not fully understood or owned by the organization. This can hinder effective implementation during a crisis and may not fully capture internal nuances or specific organizational risks. It also represents a missed opportunity for internal capacity building. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates risk assessment, regulatory requirements, and resource availability. This involves establishing a clear schedule for plan reviews e.g., annually or after significant organizational changes, defining triggers for ad hoc reviews e.g., new threats, regulatory updates, and ensuring that the review process involves key stakeholders. The framework should prioritize updating elements that are most critical to effective crisis response and compliance. Question 17. Operational review demonstrates that during a recent product recall, social media platforms became a primary channel for customer inquiries and public discussion. The company's current social media crisis management protocol lacks a clear process for categorizing the severity and regulatory implications of incoming posts, leading to inconsistent response times and potential for inadvertent disclosure of sensitive information. Which of the following approaches best optimizes the company's social media crisis management process in this context? Option A. Establish a dedicated social media response team that actively engages with all mentions in real time, providing immediate, unscripted responses to address customer concerns as they arise, prioritizing speed over formal verification. Option B. Implement a tiered response system where social media posts are immediately categorized by sentiment and potential impact, e.g., customer service issue, regulatory concern, widespread misinformation, with clear escalation paths and pre-approved response templates tailored to each category, subject to final legal and compliance review before dissemination. Option C. Develop a comprehensive library of generic crisis communication statements that can be broadly applied to any social media crisis, and instruct the social media team to deploy these statements whenever significant negative sentiment is detected. Option D. Suspend all social media activity during a crisis until the situation is fully resolved and all internal investigations are complete, to avoid making premature or inaccurate statements. The correct answer is B. Implement a tiered response system where social media posts are immediately categorized by sentiment and potential impact, e.g., customer service issue, regulatory concern, widespread misinformation, with clear escalation paths and pre-approved response templates tailored to each category, subject to final legal and compliance review before dissemination. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the rapid and often unverified nature of social media, coupled with the potential for widespread dissemination of misinformation during a crisis. The need for swift, accurate, and compliant communication is paramount. The challenge lies in balancing the urgency of response with the imperative to adhere to regulatory frameworks and ethical communication standards, particularly concerning the disclosure of material non-public information and the prevention of market manipulation. The correct approach involves a structured, multi-layered monitoring system that categorizes social media mentions based on potential impact and regulatory relevance. This allows for prioritized escalation and a coordinated response that is both timely and compliant. Specifically, it ensures that any communication is vetted for accuracy, material non-public information is not prematurely disclosed, and responses are consistent with regulatory guidance on market communications. This proactive and systematic method minimizes the risk of regulatory breaches and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on rapid, unfiltered responses risks disseminating unverified information, potentially leading to market volatility or regulatory scrutiny. Failing to identify and escalate potentially material information promptly constitutes a failure to comply with disclosure obligations. Similarly, an approach that delays response due to an overly bureaucratic internal process, even with good intentions, can exacerbate a crisis by allowing misinformation to gain traction and erode public trust, potentially violating principles of fair and orderly markets. An approach that relies on generic, pre-approved statements without specific context or verification can appear tone-deaf or irrelevant, failing to address the specific concerns being raised on social media, and thus undermining crisis communication objectives and potentially leading to further reputational harm. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes risk assessment and regulatory compliance. This involves establishing clear protocols for social media monitoring, defining escalation triggers based on the nature and potential impact of social media content, and ensuring that all responses are reviewed by legal and compliance teams before dissemination. The framework should also include provisions for rapid fact-checking and the development of accurate, contextually relevant messaging. Question 18. Governance review demonstrates that the organization's current risk assessment process for crisis communication primarily relies on internal technical assessments and historical incident data. To enhance preparedness and ensure compliance with regulatory expectations regarding stakeholder impact, which of the following approaches would be most effective in identifying potential threats and weaknesses from a stakeholder perspective? Option A. Delegate the responsibility for identifying external threats to a dedicated risk management team with no direct interaction with external parties. Option B. Conduct in-depth interviews and surveys with key external stakeholders, including customers, investors, regulators, and community representatives, to understand their perceived risks, potential impacts, and communication preferences during a crisis. Option C. Analyze only past crisis events that resulted in significant financial losses, assuming that future crises will mirror these historical patterns. Option D. Focus exclusively on identifying and quantifying the financial impact of potential technical failures and cyber attacks, as these represent the most significant operational risks. The correct answer is B. Conduct in-depth interviews and surveys with key external stakeholders, including customers, investors, regulators, and community representatives, to understand their perceived risks, potential impacts, and communication preferences during a crisis. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of stakeholder perspectives in risk assessment, moving beyond a purely internal or technical view. Effective crisis communication hinges on anticipating how different groups will perceive and react to potential threats and vulnerabilities. The challenge lies in prioritizing and integrating these diverse viewpoints into a robust risk assessment framework that is both compliant with regulatory expectations and ethically sound. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with key external stakeholders to understand their specific concerns, potential impacts on them, and their communication preferences during a crisis. This aligns with regulatory expectations for transparency and accountability in crisis preparedness. For instance, under the UK's regulatory framework, particularly as guided by the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, and the Information Commissioner's Office, ICO, organizations are expected to consider the impact of potential crises on consumers, investors, and the wider public. Ethical considerations also demand that organizations act in the best interests of all affected parties, which necessitates understanding their vulnerabilities and communication needs. This stakeholder-centric approach ensures that the risk assessment is comprehensive, realistic, and forms the basis for effective, targeted crisis communication. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on internal operational vulnerabilities overlooks the critical external dimension of risk. This fails to meet regulatory requirements for considering the impact on consumers and the market, potentially leading to inadequate preparedness for reputational damage or loss of trust. Ethically, it prioritizes the organization's internal perspective over the well-being and information needs of those outside the company. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes only the most technically complex or financially significant threats, while important, can be insufficient if it neglects the potential for less technically complex but highly visible or emotionally charged events to trigger a crisis. For example, a data breach affecting a small number of individuals might not be the most technically complex, but its impact on public trust and regulatory scrutiny can be immense. This approach risks missing vulnerabilities that, while not technically sophisticated, pose significant reputational and operational risks due to their impact on key stakeholders. A further incorrect approach that relies exclusively on historical incident data without considering emerging threats or evolving stakeholder expectations is also flawed. While historical data is valuable, it may not capture the full spectrum of potential future risks, especially in rapidly changing environments. Stakeholder expectations regarding transparency and communication are also dynamic, and failing to account for these shifts can lead to a disconnect between the organization's preparedness and public perception. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multi-stage approach. First, conducting a comprehensive internal assessment of operational and technical vulnerabilities. Second, actively seeking input from a diverse range of external stakeholders to understand their unique perspectives, concerns, and potential impacts. Third, integrating these internal and external insights to identify and prioritize risks based on their likelihood and potential impact across all affected groups. And finally, developing crisis communication plans that are tailored to address these identified risks and stakeholder needs, ensuring compliance with relevant regulations and ethical standards. Question 19. Strategic planning requires a proactive approach to potential crises. If an organization discovers a significant data breach affecting a large number of customers, what is the most ethically sound and regulatorily compliant approach to managing the initial communication? Option A. Craft a carefully worded statement that downplays the severity of the breach and focuses on the organization's robust security measures, releasing minimal details about the incident itself. Option B. Immediately issue a public statement acknowledging the breach, expressing regret, detailing the steps being taken to investigate and mitigate the damage, and outlining how affected individuals will be notified and supported. Option C. Wait until the full scope of the breach is understood and all internal investigations are complete before making any public statement, to ensure absolute accuracy. Option D. Issue a statement that focuses on deflecting blame by highlighting external factors or third-party vulnerabilities, without admitting any direct organizational fault. The correct answer is B. Immediately issue a public statement acknowledging the breach, expressing regret, detailing the steps being taken to investigate and mitigate the damage, and outlining how affected individuals will be notified and supported. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it presents a direct conflict between the immediate desire to protect the organization's reputation and the ethical imperative to be transparent with stakeholders during a crisis. The pressure to control the narrative can lead to decisions that, while seemingly beneficial in the short term, can erode trust and have severe long-term consequences. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of ethical principles and regulatory expectations in crisis communication, particularly concerning honesty and accuracy. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves acknowledging the incident promptly, admitting fault where appropriate, and committing to a thorough investigation and transparent communication of findings. This aligns with the core principles of ethical crisis communication, emphasizing honesty, integrity, and accountability. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing financial markets or public safety, often mandate timely and accurate disclosure of material information. Maintaining transparency, even when difficult, builds trust and credibility, which are essential for long-term stakeholder relationships and regulatory compliance. This approach prioritizes the well-being and informed decision-making of stakeholders over short-term reputational damage. Incorrect approaches analysis. Prioritizing a carefully crafted, limited disclosure that downplays the severity of the incident is ethically problematic because it constitutes a form of deception. This violates the principle of transparency and can lead to accusations of misleading stakeholders, potentially resulting in regulatory penalties and significant loss of trust. Such an approach fails to meet the ethical obligation to provide stakeholders with the information they need to make informed decisions. Focusing solely on damage control and deflecting blame without acknowledging any organizational responsibility is also ethically unsound. This approach demonstrates a lack of accountability, which is a cornerstone of ethical crisis management. Regulatory bodies often require organizations to take responsibility for their actions and to implement corrective measures. This tactic can be perceived as dishonest and evasive, further damaging the organization's reputation and potentially inviting more severe regulatory scrutiny. Delaying communication until all facts are definitively established, even if it means a prolonged period of silence, can be detrimental. While accuracy is important, an excessive delay in acknowledging a crisis can create a vacuum of information that is filled with speculation and rumor, often to the organization's detriment. Ethical communication requires a balance between accuracy and timeliness. Prolonged silence can be interpreted as an attempt to hide information or as a sign of organizational incompetence, both of which are damaging and ethically questionable. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical principles and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Immediate assessment of the situation and potential impact on stakeholders. 2. Consulting relevant ethical guidelines and regulatory requirements. 3. Developing a communication strategy that balances transparency, accuracy, and timeliness. 4. Being prepared to admit fault and outline corrective action. 5. Continuously monitoring stakeholder sentiment and regulatory developments, and adjusting communication as needed. The ultimate goal is to maintain trust and credibility, even in the face of adversity. Question 20. Compliance review shows that a major technology company has experienced a widespread critical system outage affecting its primary service for over 24 hours. The outage is due to a previously undisclosed software vulnerability. The company's initial internal response has been to focus on fixing the issue without immediately informing the public or regulators. Which of the following crisis communication strategies best aligns with regulatory requirements and best practices for this scenario? Option A. Issue a brief statement acknowledging a minor technical issue and assuring customers that services will resume shortly, while internally continuing to work on the complex vulnerability without further external communication until resolution. Option B. Focus all communication efforts on social media channels, providing frequent, informal updates about the progress of the fix and engaging directly with individual customer complaints to manage sentiment. Option C. Wait until the system is fully restored and the root cause is completely understood before issuing any public statement, to avoid causing unnecessary panic and to ensure all information is accurate. Option D. Issue a public statement immediately acknowledging the outage, explaining the nature of the problem, without revealing proprietary details, outlining the remediation efforts underway, and providing estimated timelines for service restoration, while also notifying relevant regulatory bodies. The correct answer is D. Issue a public statement immediately acknowledging the outage, explaining the nature of the problem, without revealing proprietary details, outlining the remediation efforts underway, and providing estimated timelines for service restoration, while also notifying relevant regulatory bodies. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for transparency with the potential for market disruption and regulatory scrutiny. The company is facing a significant operational failure that could impact its customers and stakeholders. Effective crisis communication demands a strategic approach that prioritizes accurate, timely, and consistent information dissemination while adhering to all relevant regulatory obligations. The challenge lies in crafting a message that is both informative and reassuring, without overpromising or revealing sensitive information that could be exploited. The correct approach involves acknowledging the issue promptly, providing a clear and concise explanation of the problem, outlining the steps being taken to resolve it, and offering support to affected parties. This aligns with best practices in crisis communication, which emphasize honesty, empathy, and proactive engagement. Specifically, under the regulatory framework for this exam, assumed to be US-based for illustrative purposes, focusing on SEC and FTC guidelines, timely disclosure of material non-public information is crucial to prevent insider trading and maintain market integrity. Furthermore, consumer protection regulations necessitate clear communication about service disruptions and remedies. This approach demonstrates accountability and builds trust, which are vital for long-term stakeholder relationships. An incorrect approach would be to delay communication or provide vague, misleading information. This failure to be transparent and timely can lead to significant regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and a loss of customer confidence. For instance, withholding information about a significant operational failure could be construed as a violation of SEC disclosure rules if it is deemed material to investors. Similarly, providing insufficient detail about the impact on consumers or the steps being taken to rectify the situation could violate FTC consumer protection mandates. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on damage control without addressing the root cause or offering concrete solutions. This superficial response fails to meet the ethical obligation to inform and protect stakeholders and can exacerbate the crisis by creating an impression of indifference or incompetence. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a rapid assessment of the situation's severity and potential impact. This assessment should inform the development of a communication strategy that prioritizes accuracy, clarity, and regulatory compliance. Key considerations include identifying all affected stakeholders, determining the most effective communication channels, and preparing spokespersons to deliver consistent messages. Regular updates and a commitment to resolving the issue are essential components of this framework, ensuring that communication remains a tool for rebuilding trust rather than a source of further problems.